Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming back for our final speaker for this morning's session, who I'm going to introduce to you today. Our next speaker is David Hilton. David is an authority in the sustainable energy and building sector. He has over 30 years of experience in his industry, so he will bring with him gems this morning to help inspire us all. So with a speech titled Heat Pump Retrofit, please welcome David Hilton.
Heat pump retrofit seems to be the flavor of the decade at the moment, because everybody wants to fit heat pumps to new builds. But when we look at 2050 targets, the number of buildings that need to be built by 2050, somewhere between 60 and 70% of them are already built. What do we do with those? So to put it into perspective, around 12 years ago, myself and the family moved into a 1980s Barrett-built property. So when you guys all come up and say, we've got this old 18th century cottage, ours is worse. It's as simple as that. Built with a lot of faith and friction and cost-cutting exercises. But the difference is that somebody, before we moved in, put oil into it. There's no gas in our road. So this is not really a comparison with gas at all. When we start looking at costs and stuff, I'll produce some figures of what's happening to put it into perspective. But we got to a point where we were doing a renovation, and the extension meant that there was going to be a lounge where the flue for the gas boiler was, and it's frowned upon to have a flue coming out in your lounge. So we thought, what can we do? And at the time I thought, I'm going to fit a heat pump. And my wife was like, a what? And I said, we've got one. It's called a fridge. So it's not a new technology. You're using the same technology, but as with your fridge, if you open the door and say, my kitchen's too hot, I'll open the fridge, that'll cool it down. It won't, because it wasn't designed for that purpose. So as far as I'm concerned, if you want to put a heat pump in, you've got to know what you're dealing with. We've got to have some sort of idea of exactly how good or how bad or how average your property is, and then design the heat pump to fit. Can it work? I've got one in my own property. And we've written about it a bit in Home Building and Renovating magazine. And just because it's got one brand on there doesn't mean I'm endorsing or not endorsing that brand as well. There's a lot of them around. It just happens to be the one that we put in a number of years ago. And we were worried about the noise. Noise has never, ever been a problem with with this air source heat pump. We went a little bit bigger, simply. It's a bit like if you take the analogy on cars and you think, if I wanted to do 80 miles an hour, let's leave the legality of that out, and you bought a car that could do 80 miles an hour flat out, it would make a lot of noise. If you bought a car that could do 130 miles an hour and you drove it at 80, it doesn't rev as high, it doesn't make as much noise. So there's a certain number of techniques we can use on heat pumps like that as well. Some of the things you've got to look at, though, with heat pumps is not only the sizing, but the brand, just the same as you can buy a BMW and you can buy a Fiat, and you've got to work out what it's trying to do. You also need to look at the refrigerants that are in the heat pump. Some of them behave in different ways. So there's a lot more to it than just saying, do I want a heat pump for my property? So when we start looking at heat pumps, they're beautiful things to look at. So, put them in a very prominent place so that you can actually admire their architectural merit at any given time. This outdoor fan unit, this is a BPEC rig, which is one that we use to train installers. And that unit goes outside the house with an air source heat pump. You are now moving heat from one place to another. Central heating systems up till now have all been about combustion. You're burning gas, you're burning oil, you're burning coal, you're burning wood, you're burning peat, you're burning almost anything. It's burning. So when you're burning something, you're putting a lot of heat in a very short space of time. With heat pumps, we're no longer burning anything. We're moving heat from one place to another. Now we're using a very small amount of heat over a long period of time. So the way we design things is different. Yes, it will replace your heating system. Yes, it will produce hot water. but it's doing it in a very different way. So we have to allow it to operate in that way. So we change the radiator sizing. We're no longer radiating. Two things about the heating systems so far, two words. Boilers don't boil and radiators don't radiate. But apart from that, we're all okay. What we're actually now encouraging the radiator to do is convect. Heat travels in three ways: through radiance, convection, conduction. If we put that into the analogy of a home, the sun comes down, radiant heat. If you had a cold day and you had a jacket on and you were standing in your conservatory, the sun comes through the glass, straight through your jacket, and you feel it and you go, wow, that feels good. But you don't take your jacket off because the air around you is still cold. So the heat then comes in and the radiant heat gets absorbed by objects and it starts getting warm, and you touch it and you think, that's fantastic, that feels warm, that's conduction. You're now feeling the heat. That object gets really hot and starts heating the air up around it. That's a different frequency, hence why your conservatory gets warm, because that frequency now can't go out through the glass, whereas the radiant heat can come in. So we're changing the way that we modify the frequencies. And by really weighing up what are we dealing with and using the right insulations and the right mitigation and the correct design, we should be able to then create a comfortable home. So we changed a few of the radiators in our property, and when we look at a heat pump through a thermal imaging camera, we actually then know we've got cold air coming out where the blue is, and we're moving the heat to the radiators. Now that starts looking quite warm. That is only 38 degrees, about the same temperature as your shower. So anyone who's got young kids that might be in that property, whether they're yours or the neighbors or somebody else's that just dropped them off because they couldn't be bothered anymore and thought you look after them for a while, if they hang on the radiators, they're not going to get burnt because it's not scalding temperature. Anything above 48 degrees is scalding temperature. So it's safer from that perspective. But we do have to work out how can we heat that room from 38 degrees temperature, that sort of temperature. We can go up to 50, but we don't really want to go there. The other thing we look at, because we're now using lower temperature, there's only two ways to get heat into a building if it's in water. You either make the water hotter or you pump it faster. The moment we pump it faster, we need bigger pipes. So the low temperature means bigger radiators. If you then have low temperature and a faster flow, you actually want bigger pipes as well. So if you have a 1990s to 2000 property and you think actually the insulation's quite good and you've got what's called microbore pipe, and it doesn't matter whether it's made out of plastic or metal, copper, whatever, a thin pipe holds far less water. So you have to pump it a lot faster. As you pump faster, anytime we're moving water more than 2 meters per second through there, we have a noise risk. It starts getting those banging noises. To get rid of those, we've got to increase the pressure. Then we've got to work out, is the pipework actually fit for more pressure? So there's a lot more stuff we have to start looking at. It's not as simple as saying, you know what, I've done a heat loss calculation, let's plug one of these things on the side of the building and hope that it actually works. There's a few dynamics that we have to look at. So when we've got a faster flow and we want a low noise, we need bigger pipes. So I was talking to someone a moment ago and they said, unfortunately, I've got all of these pipes have been put into our house and they boxed in trunking. And I said, brilliant. What do you mean? It looks horrible. Yeah, but it'll be easy to change. If you've got 15 mil pipes and we want to put 22 in, no drilling, no mess, no fuss, just sort it out. And we can change everything and move things around. It makes it a lot easier to retrofit. So when we start looking at it, it's not just where will that thing go. That unit that goes outside gets fitted under what's referred to as MCS guidance. MCS is the microgeneration certification scheme. It's like the gas safe of heat pumps. They have rules and regulations and installation guidance, and anyone who's really bored, if there's nothing on Netflix or Amazon or Sports Channel, you can go on and look up the installer standards. It's known as MIS 3005. Good luck with that one. Moving swiftly on. They do work at cold temperatures, clearly, but people say, isn't that the time when actually it's when we need the most heat? How does it work when it's at low temperatures like that? Well, the refrigerant that's inside a heat pump boils at -50. And boiling doesn't mean it gets hot, it just means it's changing from a liquid to a gas. So we'll have a liquid running into the heat exchanger at the back at -50. If the air temperature outside is -10, -50 says that's positively tropical. I'll have some of that heat. Give it to me. I'm turning into a gas. I'll go through the compressor. I'll get compressed, a bit like when you pump up a bicycle tire and the front of your bicycle pump gets hot. That's the compressed air. So if you just want a gentle heat, you pump it gently. If you want more heat, you're pumping really hard, so you're working hard to make a higher temperature. So we don't really want to make high temperatures, but it's a gas, we can compress it. We can't really compress a liquid. So -50, if it's -10 outside, no problem. It'll work. It's also great with that. My wife says to me, why don't you just put your tinnies in there when you're barbecuing? And I'm like, yeah, okay, we can do that. We do barbecue when it snows, and it's nice and cold outside. But you do need a good space in front of the heat pump. Bear in mind that when you're doing a reheat on your house, the temperature difference between the air going in and the air coming out could be up to 12 degrees difference. So even when it's 5 degrees ambient temperature outside, you're not thinking of gritting the paths. So if that's near a walkway, it might freeze the walkway. If the post person is bringing you energy bills, it's fine. Let them go down that path. But if the Amazon person is bringing you that tool that you really didn't need but ordered anyway, let them in. They need to bring that stuff. You know, those Amazon tools are as important as the middle aisle at Lidl. So when it comes to heat pumps, the first thing you want to do is do a heat loss calculation. And the heat loss calculation really is room by room. It's not just looking at the home and going, yeah, that'll be about 50 watts per square meter, I think. Yeah, that'll do. And then work it all out. It's looking at each room. How much heat loss is that specific room going to have? You might have a bedroom that was built above a garage and it's got 3 outside walls. You might have one that's between 2 other rooms, only 1 outside wall, different heat loss in that room. So a room by room heat loss calculation gets done, very important. Check the emitter pipework, is it big enough? If you've got micro bore, I'd start flagging it up. And if you really need to, and you want to do more of the DIY yourself, you can get a little thermal imaging camera called the Fleur 1, and they go on the bottom of your phone, somewhere between 200 and 400 quid, depending on which one you get. And you will pay a thermal imaging professional more than that to come and take just a couple of pictures. So if you're monitoring and you're thinking about stuff, a little thermal imaging camera just to give you an idea of where the pipe work is as you heat it up. You can take photos, you can see the thickness of the pipes. If you've got underfloor heating, start photographing it as it heats up. Put a ruler on the ground so you can see how far the pipes are apart, that sort of stuff. The more information we can have, the better it is. Then check planning permission. Most heat pumps or air source heat pumps get fitted under what's called General Permitted Development Order or Permitted Development, which means you do not need planning. But if you're in an AONB, as per where we're standing right now, General Permitted Development Order does not exist. So what you need then is go to the planners and say to them, I'm thinking of fitting a heat pump. What do I need to do? Do I need to put in a full-on application? Most of the time there will be planning policies in place that allow you to shortcut that, because generally they're trying to encourage the uptake of air source heat pumps. It's only where you want to put it on the front of your house facing the road, blowing cold air into your neighbor's window, that it becomes a slight challenge. Always check with your local authority on that and all the other governing bodies that go with that as well. So planning permission normally is done under permitted development. Under MCS, the guys will go through all the requirements of the general permitted development. They'll look and do noise calculations to make sure it's not going to be too noisy to your neighbor. You're supposed to have no more than 42 decibels at your neighbor's house. And I know everyone here knows exactly what 42 decibels sounds like, so we'll explain what it is. 42 decibels is about the background noise in an average lounge. That sort of background noise you get. Therefore, when we look at the sound, we then say, actually, at 5 o'clock in the morning, when it's quiet outside your bedroom, you don't want it outside that window because that's normally between sort of 15 and 20 decibels. So we start looking at the background noises in more active areas. So outside your utility or your kitchen, or outside the lounge perhaps, that's where you'd have your heat pump sited. And it only makes that noise when it's running flat out. But we've sized it to never run flat out, so we don't hear it on that. It works well. If you are still concerned, you could then split the heat pump, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, and have one outside, so it only runs when it's really cold outside, and therefore when your windows are closed. So define that fan location. Is it going to be outside the bedroom window? Is it going to be outside the utility? Is it going to be close to your neighbors? Is it going to be blowing straight at your car? Not a good place to put it. You want to know, is it going to be blowing straight at pot plants? So you want to have hardy plants, because that air coming out might, as I say, might be -7 under certain conditions. So you don't want to be freezing up your plants, or just put a holly bush there. Start defining your pipe and cable routes as well. That thing is not where your boiler was. So you need to work out, how do I get the pipe work from there to where the boiler is, because that's where all my central heating pipe work is. And it's going to be a 28 millimeter pipe, and there's going to be 2 of them, and they're going to have big sleeves of insulation around them as well. So that needs to go into the house somewhere through a wall, and you're also going to need a hard standing for it to go on as well. But check those cable routes and the pipe routes. One size does not fit all. Don't think, yeah, I'm going to buy one, it's got a single fan on it and that'll do. You need to make sure that this heat pump can actually deliver the heat according to your expectations. And that is crucial. My wife took a bit of time getting used to the whole idea of having a gentle heat for a longer period of time. She liked that radiance. When you walk past a radiator, you think, well, that's fantastic. And we find that in the bathrooms, for instance, we have got what's called infrared heating on the roof. So we can have the bathrooms at a slightly lower temperature, and then as you walk in, the radiance comes on just to give you that feeling of heat, because that's when you're at your most vulnerable. And then it turns off when you leave the room. So it's a low and slow heat. That is crucial about heat pumps, because you're moving that heat from one place to another. If you're thinking, what size heat pump fits my home? Well, we look at how many watts per square meter your house is losing. If you've got a current building regs house, it's probably about there. Older buildings, you're venturing more into this area. So you take the size of the building, in square meters that is, very, very, very generally, if you're in old money and you want to go square feet, just add a 0. I know it's not exact, and I know someone's going to come up and say it's actually 10.14 or something like that. But just add a 0. If you've got a 200 square meter house, it's 2,000 square feet. For this calculation, it's close enough. We then look at it, and this is our heat load. Now, with an air source heat pump, it loses power as the temperature outside drops. So we would then say, I've got a 200 square meter house. It's about there, so we've got, give or take, 10 kilowatt load. Fantastic. I'll put in a 10 kilowatt heat pump. It doesn't work like that. You'd lose power. So a 10 kilowatt load would probably be a 16 kilowatt heat pump when it's really cold, because you're losing power. So it's very important to not get confused between what your heat loss is and what the heat pump is trying to deliver. We also have to add in an extra amount. A lot of guys do not calculate this to say we're doing hot water as well. And we add in 200 watts per person in the house. And that's not the number of people that live in a house. I know there's sometimes 2 people that live in a 6-bedroom house. It's the number of bedrooms plus 1, because you always size the unit for full capacity. So then we would have 10. And if it was a 4-bed house, we'd have 10 plus 5 times 2, we'd have an 11 kilowatt load. We're still at a 16 kilowatt heat pump. 16 is about as good as it gets if you've only got a single phase electric supply. If you're thinking of changing to 3-phase, you can actually get more. Now, on our own property, we kind of went the whole hog, because I write about it for Home Building and Renovating magazine. Everybody was like, why are you still on oil? You drive a diesel 4x4, you're on oil, you've got this old property, and here you are preaching about all this stuff. So it got to the point where I decided to put in everything into this 1980s bungalow. And I found that I started discussing it with my wife, and eventually forgiveness was easier than permission. So we just went ahead and did the whole thing. And to be fair, on the extension, she was like, why do you want underfloor heating? Isn't that like a modern fad? Well, the cat loves it. And she helped me put it in. And I know I do get accused a lot of the time when I do these talks of almost downgrading the better part. And when we were putting in the tiling on the floor, because the underfloor heating works best, the harder the surface, the better it is. So when we were putting that in, she came along and said, can I help you with all the tiling? And I was like, no, you're not a trade. What do you know about grouting? She came out with this cake icing bag with the whole, and put the grout into it. It was brilliant. And I was just standing there with a mouthful of teeth thinking, hold on, this is brilliant, but how do I say that in a very tactful but non-sort of... and I came along and I was like, why don't the builders merchants have that? The next time I went down to B&Q, other builders merchants are available, I was looking in the tiling section, and what do they got on the top shelf? Cake icing bags for grouting. Trades that don't look, well, we look but don't see. So this is it. You sometimes get, I think a lot of trades as well, they hear but don't listen. And there's that as well that goes into it. So sometimes with this modern stuff, you've got to look at things and say, this is what we want. And if that person won't deliver it for you, find someone who will. And so what we did was we put in the air source heat pump. You have to have a solid stand for it to go on. You can't put it on the grass because condensation comes out the back. We have underfloor heating and radiators. They all run at exactly the same temperature. So we can actually, we've sized them, oversized them, so that the whole lot runs at 38 degrees. And it was calculated at 45. We never need 45 on it. It all runs at 38 degrees. We've then put in all of the thermostatic radiator valves, those TRVs, that mean absolutely nothing. They've got numbers 1 to 5 on them that just gives you an indication of which way to turn them. Whereas if you change those for motorized ones that have 2 little batteries in them, you can then set it on an app or a controller on the wall and just set exactly the right temperature you want for each room. So you can set it, I want that room is unoccupied, set it at 15 degrees. That room's the master bed, set it at 18 degrees. The lounge, 21 degrees. It will then open and close and keep that temperature. So you can zone your system. What is also incredible with it, and was an unexpected bonus, was that you can schedule it as well. Because the heat pump, when it's delivering heat, it's doing it gently. If it's sending heat to the house, it's also looking at what temperature the water's coming back. If that water's always cold, it's going to say, I'm not doing the job, and it starts ramping up and lifting the temperature. So if you've started with your lounge first, and you say, right, lounge comes on, it heats up. Within 20 minutes, the heat is starting to come back to the heat pump, and it says, I don't need to ramp up. So it starts getting to temperature. We then get the next room to start and the next room. So instead of it doing one big hill and getting to a really high temperature, it's just doing a series of little hills. And you're managing in the efficiency. So that it took up its so-called miles per gallon. We were a little concerned about noise. So we split and had 2 heat pumps. There's one built into that hot water cylinder. Now that hot water cylinder itself sounds a bit like grandma's fridge. So it's actually noisier than the one outside. There's different brands that you can use of the same thing if you want to. That never runs in summer. So there was a good 3 weeks when it wasn't running this year. And we were told, do not use mechanical ventilation heat recovery system in an older building. So what did I do? I used a mechanical ventilation heat recovery system in an older building. What that does is it just ventilates every room. And during the whole pandemic, when we had extra occupancy and the joys of homeschooling, we have for 4 years never had condensation on the windows. No more. It's gone. Because you're taking the moisture out of the building and you're recovering that heat. And then put the fresh air back into the home, so it's far healthier, but you've recovered the heat from the stale air going out rather than pumping it out of the windows. And any excess heat that's left, if it's slightly inefficient, goes into the little heat pump, and then it goes out the wall at about -12. And the little heat, it doesn't matter. That can go to the neighbors. I don't mind. They can have a bit of that. And then it makes hot water, and it only uses 600 watts. So because we've got photovoltaic panels on the roof, there's many more days a year where you've got a spare 600 watts than a spare 4 kilowatts to run that heat pump. So you're managing in the bigger opportunity for the whole system to actually work together. Would I do that again? Maybe not. Maybe I would, but I tried it, it worked, and in other circumstances I certainly wouldn't say I wouldn't do it again. It's the noise of that heat pump that's the problem for us in a smaller property. But I'd like to listen to other ones that don't have the same old school compressors in them. But if you want to be mixing things together, just find guys that can do it. This, as I say, was a 1980s bungalow, and the guys come along and say it's probably the most expensive house on the street and you'll never get your money back. Well, we're not planning to move. And if we do, it'll be into a camper van and leave the kids behind, and that'll be that. You know, maybe an electric camper van, we'll get one of them and sort it out that way. But I reckon that an air source heat pump can work on many, many properties, but don't rush out and go and get them. Look at the cost of fuel. The cost of gas at the moment is about 7.3 pence per kilowatt on the cap, and electricity is about 28. So we're somewhere in a 3-to-1 ratio. In October, it's going up to 10 pence for gas and 34 pence for electricity. So when we start comparing that with the efficiency on a heat pump, you would need 340% efficiency to break even against gas. For me, it wasn't a cost thing that we were looking at for oil. But there is this balance between what I call the two ecos, your economic and your ecologic, that you've got to try and balance up and say, where do I want to put my investment? Because the carbon emissions saving for this is huge compared with gas. At the moment, we burn gas to make electricity. So 40% of our electricity comes from burning gas. So right now, does it still make sense or not? But if you're looking at doing a lot of disruption, now's the time to start thinking about air source heat pumps. They do work, they just need to be thought about, and will it deliver the type of heat that you want? Sort of on time. So we're happy to take any questions. Yes?
Is there a concept of a hybrid system where
Yes.
you keep on using gas for the really hot weeks?
The hybrid system is also known as a bivalent system, and the boiler upgrade scheme voucher, that £5,000 voucher that you can currently get, is not supported within that. But it was something that when my aunt asked me and said, should I be putting a heat pump on the house? First of all, I said no, because she said she doesn't know whether she's going to be there for 2 weeks or 20 years at this point, because she's in her 80s. It was her sense of humor, not mine. I'd rather she's there for the 20 years. But I said, if a family moved into the house and maximized it, they might not want to, because there's only single-phase electric and there isn't even a 3-phase connection where they are rurally. I said, you'd probably keep the oil and you'd put a heat pump in, and then you'd work out when the heat pump stops being efficient, and the oil can kick in and take it. And bivalent isn't just one formula. It just means that you've got a boiler and a heat pump working together. One might be that the boiler's doing the hot water and the heat pump's doing the space heating. That could be something where you might have a combi boiler on a small building already, and you do that and you think there's nowhere for a hot water tank. Or it might be a big old building and you think actually the heat pump will be fine until it gets down to about 3 degrees outside. Then I'll get the boiler to kick in just to top up the temperature. So there's different ways of doing it, but it's definitely out there. And I think we'll start seeing more of that the moment the boiler upgrade scheme's gone, because people will have to look at the science of what goes into it in a much bigger way. Sure, we're there.
Have you got an idea of how much you spent, say per month for bills, before the heat pump and after doing the heat pump?
Yes, we do. And the truth of the matter is that you have to factor in the cost of fuel as well. So with that, the running cost of the heat pump in the beginning was more than the oil, but taking into account the cost of electricity now and the cost of oil now, and the fact that we're using more of the photovoltaic panels, the running costs are for us about the same as if we'd stayed on oil. But we don't have the hassle of topping it up, cleaning out the tanks, buying the new machinery, leaks, all of that. One of the issues I have with oil is the potential of leaks. If you get oil leaking under your foundations, you knock the building down. You can't clean it out. It's an environmental hazard, must be removed. You take the building out. And that becomes the balance of risk, where I did not want that. Against gas, it would be a much harder decision to make, because there is this ecologic balance. Against gas, I don't think you'll get a financial return, but your carbon emissions return will be huge on that. But right now, while there's an incentive of $5,000 towards it, that might swing it that way. I think that given what's happening in Ukraine and places like that, we are looking far more now at not only carbon emission savings, but energy independence. And the electrification of heat is one of the only ways to do that. Everybody's talking about hydrogen. I think it's more likely that we'll get hydrogen as a way of storing energy seasonally. So you could have a wind farm and a solar farm generating loads of electricity, and you're thinking, what can we do with it? Oh, there's a dam next to it. What we'll do is, water is H2O, let's take the O out, we're left with the H2, put that into the pipeline, ship it to where we want it and store it seasonally, and then turn that back into electricity when we need it. So hydrogen is part of the future, but I don't think we'll be combusting it fully in boilers. By 2023, we'll see 20% of our gas grid with hydrogen in it. It's short term. The electrification of heat is the way we're going, and the electrification of cars as well on that.
One more question.
Sure.
What was the cost upfront?
Yeah. Well, the cost up front, to put it into perspective, what I'll do is I'll say what the cost up front would have been if I hadn't done the work myself, because that would put it into more of a perspective. I would say that if fitting a single heat pump like that was an 11 kilowatt heat pump. It's an 11.2. The house was about 168 square meters, somewhere around there. You'd probably, in those days, would have been looking at, I'd say, about 10 or 12,000 pounds with the upgrade to the radiators included and the underfloor heating. Now, you'd be able to take 5,000 pounds off that. So you're probably looking at about 5,000 to 7,000 pounds investment on that, if you take into account the boiler upgrade scheme, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, David. Firstly, I just want to say thank you for explaining that in the way that even I did it. So that's great. That's the first time ever. And secondly, you've nearly answered the question, but I was going to ask you, the £5,000 incentive that is available through grants currently, how much of an impact does that make on the actual overall bill from going from a gas central heated house, 3-bed semi to a ground source or an air source heat pump?
Right, so the question is, how much of an impact does the £5,000 grant actually make on the investment? It depends on the size of the house, because the £5,000 is the same whether you're doing a 1-bedroom cottage or a 9-bedroom home. The £5,000 is just, it's a boiler upgrade, it's a voucher scheme. What happens is that you will go to your installer will then give you a quote, they then give you, they then apply and get a voucher. The voucher administrators get hold of you to say, have they genuinely given you a quote? You go ahead, the voucher gets issued, they do the install. You don't pay all the money up front, you pay the bill excluding the voucher. The voucher then gets redeemed by the installer, not by you. If you were doing a new build, the installer might ask you to pay that, because there's only 90,000 vouchers over 3 years. Don't panic, there's only 4,500 been used so far since April. But that could end tomorrow, depending on what the new government decide, or they could extend it and say this is a brilliant thing and we need to encourage the uptake of heat pumps. How much difference does it make? Well, there's two sides to that. If you were putting a heat pump in because there was a voucher, it's the wrong solution. If you're thinking about putting in a heat pump anyway and you're just bringing it forward a bit because the voucher's there, fantastic. Take it on. It's not going to make it a cheap installation. Don't think, right, I was on a gas boiler, I'm now going to get a free installation of a heat pump. So because it's never as simple as that. But it does make a difference if you were looking at, and it might tip the balance to say, should I just replace the boiler one more time, and then next time I'll do a heat pump? Currently, you've not only got the £5,000 voucher, but all of the upgrades and associated costs with an install are VAT free. So there's that as well. So your 10 grand won't have VAT on it. Wait a bit, and then you'll pay the 5 grand plus the £2,000 VAT on it, plus the extra that would have been the VAT on the 5,000 as well. You're now up to pretty close to £18,000. So there's about an £8,000 difference, not just 5,000 if it was a big install. What I'd be doing is having a look. There's a number of energy companies that are doing surveys and things like that that you can tap into. Some of them are free, some of them charge for it. Just have a look and see who your energy company is and see if there's a way of seeing what's realistic. How much is this actually going to cost me? Get the real numbers rather than theories of it.
Brilliant, thank you.
Sure.
In order to get £5,000 grant,
Yes.
Does your house have to comply with all the other standards that, because you were chatting to somebody who said you have to have right installation on the walls to get, is that the same grant?
To get the boiler upgrade scheme, which, it's a voucher, to get that upgrade scheme, your house has to be able to be installed in accordance with MCS guidance. And MCS guidance has a load of stipulations on what the maximum flow temperature is allowed to be in the property, and also what your minimum energy performance certificate criteria is as well. So if you came along and said, you know what, I've got this building that's built like a really badly constructed shed and air was blowing right through it, they'd be like, you know what, this heat pump's not going to work. We're not giving you 5 grand towards it. You need to upgrade it. It's not always possible. If you've got a listed building, there might be certain things you're just simply not allowed to do to it. So then you have to apply for special dispensation to prove that, yes, it's failed on the EPC, which is that energy performance certificate, but I'm still able to get the unit in at low flow temperatures. So there might be a criteria on it, but on buildings that haven't been upgraded, you will not be eligible for the grant. They're not throwing money at absolutely everything. Sure, yes.
You've talked a little bit about hydrogen, but
Yes.
What is the future looking like for running existing systems, i.e. the gas boiler, with things like it's commercially viable but not available at the moment with like synthetic methane. So if you can get your gas boiler use down,
Yes.
so then are we looking at the future is going to mean that we can then use it on a more sustainable basis?
So the question is really looking at hydrogen and other types of gases and things, and whether it's worth going to a heat pump or staying with gas because of the futures and bringing your load down. Hydrogen is coming, and Worcester and Baxi and a load of different boiler companies have already manufactured and tested hydrogen-ready boilers. A hydrogen-ready boiler, by definition, is one that can burn either full methane or full hydrogen, or anything in between. Currently, most boilers that are out there, if they're condensing boilers, can take up to a mix of 20%. So they're known as hydrogen. They're not hydrogen-ready or hydrogen boilers. They are just ones that can take up to 20%. So that's why by the end of 2023, we fully expect to have 20% of our energy in the grid coming from hydrogen, that mix of gas that is. The problem with pure hydrogen is that the calorific value, how much energy you actually get from, let's say, a litre of it, then it's a third of methane. So if you've currently got a 24 kilowatt boiler that gives you 12 litres per minute, for instance, you will, if you put hydrogen into it, you would have a 4 kilowatt boiler giving you 4 litres per minute on that kind of maths. And My son would get out the shower, so it would have that benefit, but he might not be clean. But what we do then is as you mentioned about different gases, there's synthetic gases. There's anaerobic digestion, which is the decomposition of organic waste. And you'll see them on farms where it looks like a big bouncy castle. And that's just decomposition, and that's known as anaerobic digestion. But they can also take everything that is not glass and metal, and they can incinerate it and turn that into what's called synthesis gas. And synthesis gas has a very high calorific value. So they mix synthesis gas and hydrogen together, and you've then got a usable gas. The problem is we haven't got enough of it. So as we go forward, we do need many homes that are compatible to move over to heat pumps so that we can start using this synthesis gas and the other stuff. But with all of that processing and the absorption of hydrogen, you've suddenly got a huge cost. So you will end up then with hydrogen costing the same as electric. Then your heat pump, even if it's inefficient at 200% efficiency, will look like a brilliant solution. So that cost of gas is going to creep up and become more level with electricity in the future, simply because of the economies of trying to find the gas. That's what we're looking at. And I think we're out of time. Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah.